Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of Egypt's most intriguing yet often overlooked figures, Sobenfr. She was Egypt's very first female pharaoh. Yes, you heard that right. While we often hear about Cleopatra, she wasn't the first woman to wear the crown of pharaoh. That honor belongs to Sobenfr, whose name has been somewhat buried in the sands of history. But don't let that fool you. Her reign was filled with fascinating details that we'll explore tonight, and by the end of this journey, you'll be quietly amazed at how much power and influence she wielded. You might think of pharaohs as towering, larger-than-life figures like Ramses or Tutankhamun, but Sobenfr's rise to power was nothing short of extraordinary. Born to a royal family that had its fair share of intrigue, her path was anything but predictable. In fact, historians still argue about the exact details of her life and reign, which only adds to the allure of her story. And let's be honest, she probably had to navigate some pretty tricky waters to get where she did. Being a woman in a male-dominated world certainly wasn't a walk in the desert. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I love hearing from you, so feel free to share where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. I always find it interesting how people from all over the world share this moment of relaxation together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Sobenfr was born around 1800 BCE, in the twilight years of Egypt's 12th dynasty. As with many aspects of her life, the details of her birth remain a bit hazy. Some ancient texts suggest she was the daughter of Pharaoh Amenemhat III, but some debate exists over whether she was actually his daughter or his sister. Sibling drama in ancient Egypt, just like today, but with more hieroglyphics and fewer reality TV cameras. Regardless, Sobenfr was undoubtedly born into a royal family that expected nothing less than greatness from her. But let's pause for a second. Imagine what it was like back then. Egypt was one of the most powerful and advanced civilizations in the ancient world. The pyramids had already been built centuries before, and the Nile was as much a lifeblood of the country as it is today. But power? That was still largely in the hands of men. Pharaohs were almost always male, and the idea of a woman ruling over this grand civilization was practically unheard of. Yet, Sobenfr would defy those odds. Historians speculate that Sobenfr's ascension to the throne may have come at a time when her family line was in turmoil. There are conflicting accounts of what happened after her father's death. Some say there was a brief interruption in the royal succession, while others suggest Sobenfr had to fight for her place as pharaoh in a deeply patriarchal society. The details are unclear, but the end result was the same. She succeeded her father and ruled Egypt as the first female pharaoh in history. But her reign wasn't just a symbolic gesture. Sobenfr was deeply involved in the administration of Egypt and the direction of its politics. When Sobenfr took the throne, Egypt was at a crossroads. The 12th dynasty, once a period of great prosperity and strength, was beginning to falter. There was internal strife, economic instability, and a shift in the balance of power. Egypt's borders were being threatened by invasions, and its economy was starting to show signs of strain. The task of holding the empire together, of making sure Egypt remained as powerful as it had been for centuries, fell on Sobenfr's shoulders. And unlike some rulers who might have hid behind their title, she took action. She immediately started addressing the challenges her kingdom faced. It wasn't just about maintaining the peace. Sobenfr took measures to restore Egypt's economy and strengthen its defenses. It's said that she used her royal position to initiate some ambitious building projects, which was a common way for pharaohs to assert their power. The ancient Egyptians were masterful builders. After all, and Sobonfru commissioned several impressive monuments during her reign. These were both symbolic and practical, testament to her ability to blend the old with the new, honoring her heritage while navigating a turbulent time. What's interesting, though, is that Sobonfru didn't follow the typical patterns that most male pharaohs adhered to. For one, she took the throne not as the consort of a king but as a ruler in her own right. You might expect her reign to be overshadowed by her male counterparts, but Sobonfru wasn't one to be easily dismissed. In fact, the way she wore her titles, referencing the gods as her protectors, suggests she fully embraced the divine right to rule, just as any male pharaoh would have. There's something almost poetic about her rise to power. Imagine a woman, in an ancient world where women were rarely in positions of political control, stepping up to take the throne when her kingdom was on the brink of collapse. She didn't sit idly by. She took command, all while navigating the pressures of gender, politics, and the weight of her royal heritage. Historians still debate whether Sobonfru was able to rule entirely on her own or whether she had male advisors and family members working behind the scenes. Some suggest her reign was a partnership, with male relatives handling the military and foreign affairs, while she focused on the internal management of Egypt. But whatever the arrangement, it's clear that Sobonfru had the vision and resolve to rule effectively. Now, if you're picturing this pharaoh sitting on a golden throne, waving around a scepter, think again. Sobonfru was not your typical monarch. The ancient Egyptians had a very practical approach to leadership, and Sobonfru wasn't one to flaunt her power unnecessarily. In fact, there's evidence that she ruled with a gentle hand. Unlike some of the more famous pharaohs who were known for their wars and conquests, Sobonfru's reign focused more on maintaining stability and ensuring Egypt's survival through internal reforms. It's almost as though she was quietly working behind the scenes, keeping the kingdom running smoothly without drawing unnecessary attention to herself. Yet, for all her quiet determination, Sobonfru also knew how to wield power when needed. She understood the intricacies of diplomacy, of aligning with powerful figures in and outside Egypt, and she did so with a deft touch that belied her gender. But her reign wasn't just about politics, it was also about culture, art, and religion. We'll delve more into that in the next section, but for now, let's linger for a moment on the unique power that Sobonfru held as Egypt's first female pharaoh. Sobonfru's ascension to the throne was not just a personal victory, but a symbol of change in a world that was still very much ruled by men. To understand the full weight of her reign, we need to take a closer look at the world she inherited. The 12th dynasty, under her father Amenemhat III, had reached its zenith in terms of wealth, military power, and cultural influence. However, by the time Sobonfru became pharaoh, cracks were starting to appear in the foundation of this great dynasty. Egypt was on the verge of significant internal and external pressures. One of Sobonfru's first challenges as pharaoh was stabilizing the kingdom amidst these growing threats. While male pharaohs before her had often relied on military might and conquests to maintain their power, Sobonfru approached her rule differently. She understood the importance of preserving Egypt's wealth and resources rather than seeking to expand them through war. This approach was likely a reflection of the broader political landscape of the time. Egypt had expanded its borders for centuries, and it was now time to hold steady and defend the homeland rather than extending itself further. Sobonfru's decision to focus on maintaining the status quo was a wise one, as it allowed her to direct her attention toward internal affairs, which were just as pressing. One of the key ways she managed to stabilize Egypt was by focusing on the economic health of the kingdom. Sobonfru understood that Egypt's strength was tied to its agricultural output, particularly in relation to the Nile River. The flooding of the Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt's economy, providing fertile soil for crops, but it also posed a risk when it flooded too much or not enough. It's fascinating to think about how the ancient Egyptians were so attuned to their environment, using their knowledge of the river cycles to predict floods and plan their harvests. Sobenfur likely worked closely with her advisors and regional leaders to ensure that the agricultural system remained robust and productive. But Sobenfur's leadership wasn't only about managing crises. She also worked to improve Egypt's infrastructure. Evidence suggests that she took a keen interest in building projects during her reign, including the construction of temples and other monumental structures. These architectural feats were not just symbols of her power, but also served practical purposes, creating jobs and boosting Egypt's economy. It's possible that Sobenfur's ability to balance the delicate economic landscape, coupled with her thoughtful building projects, helped her maintain Egypt's stability during an otherwise tumultuous time. While she wasn't as outwardly flamboyant as some of her male counterparts, Sobenfur did make sure to leave her mark on Egypt in a way that felt both personal and monumental. In fact, Sobenfur's reign is often remembered for her artistic patronage and her ability to maintain the high cultural standards of the 12th dynasty. She commissioned statues, carvings, and reliefs that depicted her as a strong, capable ruler. Unlike other female pharaohs who may have been depicted as passive or decorative, Sobenfur was often shown in a regal, powerful pose, emphasizing her role as a leader of Egypt. What's particularly interesting about Sobenfur's reign is the subtlety with which she exercised her power. Historians still debate whether she ruled entirely alone or had a regent or male advisors helping her behind the scenes. However, the surviving monuments and inscriptions suggest that Sobenfur was very much involved in every aspect of her kingdom's administration. She was in many ways a hands-on ruler. It's possible that Sobenfur had to balance the traditional expectations of a king with the limitations placed on her because of her gender. In a society where women were rarely granted full political authority, Sobenfur's reign was an anomaly, one that she navigated with remarkable poise and intelligence. There's something quietly remarkable about how Sobenfur managed her reign. While many of her male predecessors had been military conquerors or seen as divinely powerful figures, Sobenfur relied on her intellect, diplomacy, and understanding of Egypt's internal needs. She wasn't about making grandiose claims or seeking to immortalize herself through extravagant conquests. Instead, she focused on solidifying Egypt's foundation through careful stewardship. Her legacy, although not as loud or flashy as that of some other pharaohs, is still significant in its own right. Historians argue that Sobenfur's political strategy was likely influenced by her role as a woman in a patriarchal society. While some rulers could assert their power through military means, Sobenfur may have recognized early on that her best route to success lay in maintaining Egypt's economic strength and ensuring internal stability. Perhaps, in her mind, the true power of a ruler was in holding everything together, preserving the wealth, the traditions, and the cultural grandeur of Egypt. In many ways, Sobenfur embodied the quiet strength of leadership, which is often less appreciated but just as important as the loud, warlike reigns of other pharaohs. At this point, you might be wondering about Sobenfur's personal life. Did she have family who influenced her decisions? Did she have a partner or children who played a role in her reign? Unfortunately, details about her family life are scarce. We know that she was the daughter, or possibly sister, of Amenemhat III, but very little is known about her relationships with other members of the royal family. Some historians speculate that she may have been married to a man named Amenemhat IV, although there's little evidence to confirm this. Others suggest that she may have ruled as a widow, which would have been an even rarer occurrence for a female ruler in ancient Egypt. Either way, Sobenfer's reign was defined by her ability to maintain power on her own terms. There's also the question of her image and how she was perceived by the Egyptian people. The pharaohs were not just political rulers, they were also religious figures, believed to be the living embodiments of the gods. Sobenfer, like her predecessors, had to balance her earthly power with her divine role. It's said that she was associated with the crocodile god Sobek, which is where she gets her name. Sobek was a powerful and fearsome god, often depicted with the head of a crocodile, and Sobenfer's association with him may have helped reinforce her image as a strong, commanding leader. But just how much the people of Egypt worshipped her in her own right, rather than as a figurehead, remains a point of scholarly debate. As we continue to uncover the quiet strength of Sobenfer, it's essential to recognize the enormous weight of the expectations placed upon her as Egypt's first female pharaoh. While Egypt's political landscape may have shifted during her reign, there were still powerful forces at play behind the scenes, forces of tradition, religion, and the gender roles embedded in society. It's almost impossible to imagine the pressure Sobenfer must have felt, having to not only maintain the greatness of her kingdom but also to prove that a woman could rule as effectively as a man. The very idea of a woman in charge of the most powerful civilization in the world was, at the time, radical. Sobenfer's leadership was as much about carving out space for herself as it was about ruling Egypt. Historically, Egypt's pharaohs had almost exclusively been male, and the idea of a woman taking the throne was largely unheard of. The male rulers of Egypt were seen not just as monarchs, but as divine figures, intermediaries between the gods and the people. Sobenfer, however, had a unique position. While she undoubtedly had to deal with the societal expectations placed on her as a woman, she also inherited the divine right to rule that had been passed down through the male lineage. This duality in her position, both a woman in a man's world and a ruler imbued with divine power, gave her the opportunity to prove that leadership was not confined to a gender. She had to constantly balance these pressures, and in many ways, her success came from navigating the line between adhering to tradition and creating space for a new, more inclusive kind of leadership. Historians have long debated how Sobenfer was perceived by the people of Egypt. We know that she wasn't alone in ruling. Ancient Egyptian pharaohs often had advisors, particularly male relatives, who would have helped with the governance of the state. But despite her potential reliance on others, Sobenfer was still the visible face of Egypt's leadership, and her role was largely symbolic. Yet, her reign is remembered as one where she held power, not through military conquest or large-scale wars, but through the quiet management of her kingdom. Sobenfer's reign represents a fascinating moment in history where a woman was able to slip through the cracks of the male-dominated pharaoh system and assert herself as a powerful leader in her own right. Perhaps Sobenfer's most profound accomplishment was how she was able to maintain Egypt's status as a powerful empire, despite not following the usual patterns of conquest and war. In fact, historians still wonder how she managed to do this, given the military nature of Egyptian rulers. Some even question whether she was actively involved in military campaigns or whether she delegated these matters to her male advisors and generals. This is one area where we encounter ambiguity in Sobenfer's reign. The historical record doesn't provide clear answers about her military involvement. What we do know is that she managed to keep Egypt intact, which was no small feat. One of the things that's most intriguing about Sobenfer's reign is the way in which she embraced the roles typically held by male rulers, even as she faced criticism and doubt for being a woman in power. Like many pharaohs, Sobenfer took on the role of religious leader as well as political ruler. The Egyptians believed that their pharaohs were divine beings, and Sobenfru was no exception. She likely used her association with the crocodile god Sobek, from which she took her name, to reinforce her divine right to rule. Sobek was a god of strength, fertility, and protection, qualities that Sobenfru would have needed in spades to prove her worth as pharaoh. But Sobenfru's religious affiliation also raised questions about her true power. While male rulers of Egypt could often claim to have the protection of the gods on their side, Sobenfru's connection to Sobek, a god whose physical representation was the crocodile, might have made her seem more foreign or intimidating to the people. This god, after all, wasn't as widely revered in Egypt as other gods like Ra or Osiris. It's possible that Sobenfru's connection to Sobek may have been both a boon and a challenge, giving her a certain mystique while also setting her apart from the more traditionally revered deities of Egypt. Sobenfru also made sure to put her name on the monuments and buildings that were constructed during her reign, ensuring her legacy lived on long after her reign ended. Pharaohs had long used architecture as a way to demonstrate their power, and Sobenfru followed suit. While male pharaohs often commissioned grandiose temples and statues that depicted them in the most flattering light, Sobenfru's architectural contributions were more subtle. She commissioned a temple dedicated to Sobek, which would have reinforced her divine status and established a lasting reminder of her power. However, the monuments she left behind were not just for self-glorification. Sobenfru's buildings and statues served as symbols of the continuity of Egypt's greatness, and through them, she sought to maintain Egypt's prosperity. These structures were not about aggressive conquest or dominance over other nations. Rather, they were about internal stability. It's possible that Sobenfru, recognizing the changing political environment of Egypt, sought to anchor her rule in the strength of her ancestors, building on the monuments that had come before her. While many of her accomplishments are hidden behind the veil of time, Sobenfru's role as a ruler is still remarkable, if only because it marked a break from Egypt's long-standing tradition of male-only rulers. Though she did not rule for long, her reign lasted only about 4 years. Her time as pharaoh was deeply impactful. Her quiet leadership stands as a powerful testament to the possibility of women in positions of power, even in the most unlikely of places. Historians still argue about how much of Sobenfru's reign was defined by her gender and how much was shaped by the political and military realities of Egypt at the time. What is clear, however, is that Sobenfru managed to survive and even thrive in a world that was not ready for a female ruler. Her reign, though short-lived, was a period of stability and quiet strength that allowed Egypt to navigate some of its most challenging times. Despite the challenges she faced as a woman in power, Sobenfru's story is one of resilience and careful diplomacy, and her legacy continues to influence the way we think about women in leadership. As we explore Sobenfru's reign, it's clear that her leadership wasn't just about holding the throne. She had to navigate the complex social and political systems that shaped ancient Egypt. One of the most fascinating aspects of Sobenfru's rule was how she blended her identity as a woman with the expectations placed upon her as pharaoh. In a society where male rulers were the norm, she had to carve out her own space, all while holding on to the divine right to rule, which had been passed down through her ancestors. But how did Sobenfru manage to balance her gender with the rigid roles and structures of ancient Egyptian society? The ancient Egyptians, like many other ancient cultures, had clear expectations of gender roles. Men were the warriors, the conquerors, and the political leaders, while women were often confined to the home or the royal court, with limited authority. However, Sobenfru was no ordinary woman, and her position as pharaoh wasn't just about gender. It was about authority, lineage, and divine right. Sobenfur's ability to maintain her position despite being a woman in a male-dominated world speaks volumes about her political savvy and the respect she commanded. What's remarkable is that Sobenfru didn't necessarily challenge the traditional gender roles of her time, she simply worked within them. In many depictions, Sobenfru is shown as a pharaoh in full regalia, wearing the traditional pharaoh's crown, with all the symbols of royal power. But unlike her male counterparts, who often emphasized their strength and virility, Sobenfru's image was subtly different. She was depicted with softer features, not in the same over-the-top martial poses that other male rulers favored. Her statues and carvings often portrayed her in a more balanced, graceful manner, emphasizing her leadership qualities without overtly focusing on her gender. This suggests that Sobenfru understood the need to strike a balance between maintaining the traditional pharaoh image and presenting herself as a capable and competent ruler, unthreatened by her gender. Some historians suggest that Sobenfru might have adopted the masculine traits of her male predecessors, but she didn't take this approach to extremes. Instead of mimicking the military-heavy focus of her male predecessors, Sobenfru emphasized diplomacy, economic reform, and internal stability. She was a ruler who understood the importance of maintaining Egypt's wealth, culture, and traditions, and she did so by not seeking to expand Egypt's borders or engage in destructive warfare. Sobenfru's reign was one of consolidation, not conquest. And in this, she was remarkably successful. Her kingdom remained intact, and Egypt continued to thrive. At the same time, Sobenfru's image was not entirely without the trappings of male pharaohs. Some inscriptions depict her wearing the traditional royal beard that was commonly associated with male rulers. This beard was symbolic, indicating that she held the authority of the pharaoh, regardless of her gender. It's an interesting nod to the fact that while Sobenfru was a woman, she was not perceived as a female pharaoh in the way we might expect today. She was simply a pharaoh, and her gender was a secondary concern to her divine authority. Her ability to wear the traditional symbols of power without feeling the need to explain her gender to the people speaks volumes about the respect she commanded as a ruler. Now, we must also consider the wider cultural context of Sobenfru's reign. Ancient Egypt, like many ancient civilizations, was deeply religious, and the pharaoh was seen as the intermediary between the gods and the people. This religious connection gave the pharaohs incredible power, but it also placed them under the scrutiny of the priesthood and religious institutions. Sobenfru's relationship with the gods was likely a critical part of her ability to rule. Her association with Sobuk, the crocodile god, was a clever way of reinforcing her image as a powerful ruler. Sobuk was associated with strength, fertility, and protection, qualities that Sobenfru could have easily leaned into to bolster her leadership. Her religious role was not just ceremonial, it was central to her ability to command respect. Sobenfru was likely depicted in religious iconography as a ruler who had been chosen by the gods. This divine endorsement would have helped her secure the loyalty of her subjects, as the Egyptians believed that their pharaohs were divinely appointed. For Sobenfru, using her association with the god Sobuk was a way of asserting her power without relying on the traditional military victories that male pharaohs were known for. Instead, her strength came from the divine, and it was through that divine authority that she was able to maintain control over Egypt. But Sobenfru didn't just rely on religious symbolism to maintain power, she also needed to manage the military and foreign relations, which were vital aspects of her role. While we don't know exactly how involved Sobenfru was in the military campaigns of her time, it's clear that she had to maintain Egypt's borders and protect the kingdom from external threats. Egypt, like any empire, faced constant pressures from neighboring regions and rival kingdoms, and Sobenfer would have had to navigate these challenges with diplomacy, strategic alliances, and a careful balancing of military power. One of the most fascinating aspects of Sobenfer's reign is that she ruled at a time when Egypt's empire was beginning to shift. The wealth and power of the 12th dynasty were starting to wane, and there were increasing threats from foreign invaders and internal struggles. Sobenfer's reign, then, represents a kind of turning point in Egypt's history, a time when the old ways of military conquest were beginning to give way to new forms of governance. Sobenfer's ability to manage this transition, to keep Egypt stable in the face of external pressures, speaks to her political acumen and foresight. While many other rulers might have fallen victim to the pressures of war or internal unrest, Sobenfer was able to hold her ground. Historians still debate how she managed to do this. Some argue that she relied heavily on her advisors and male relatives, while others suggest that she had a stronger hand in the political decisions than we realize. Either way, Sobenfer's reign marks a period of relative calm and consolidation for Egypt, a moment in time when internal stability was more important than military conquest. In many ways, Sobenfer's rule represents a new kind of leadership, one that focused on balance, diplomacy, and internal governance rather than the traditional patterns of war and expansion. It's this shift in approach that makes her reign so fascinating, as it challenges the typical narrative of pharaohs as conquerors and warriors. Sobenfer's story shows us that leadership isn't always about military might. Sometimes, it's about finding ways to maintain stability and peace within a complex and turbulent world. By now, we've explored the monumental challenges Sobenfer faced as Egypt's first female pharaoh. She had to navigate a delicate balance between divine authority, the expectations of her gender, and the changing political landscape of Egypt. But Sobenfer didn't just sit in the palace managing affairs from afar. As ruler, she understood the importance of visible leadership, being present in the public eye, commissioning projects that displayed her power, and ensuring that the country's legacy was preserved for future generations. A ruler's presence was just as important as their actions, especially in a culture that revered its pharaohs as living gods. Sobenfer's public image was carefully crafted to reinforce her authority. Unlike many male rulers who often used military triumphs to prove their worth, Sobenfer's image was one that blended both traditional symbols of power and a more nuanced, regal elegance. One of the most fascinating elements of her reign was her use of art and architecture to solidify her legacy. In an ancient world where the written word was rare and expensive, monumental sculptures and temples were the primary means by which pharaohs communicated their rule to the masses. Perhaps the most notable feature of Sobenfer's reign was her focus on religious and cultural development. She understood that Egypt's greatness wasn't just in its military conquests or wealth, but in its deeply rooted cultural and religious traditions. Sobenfer was a patron of the arts and commissioned various statues, reliefs, and temples throughout Egypt. These public works were not just for her own glorification, they were for the benefit of Egypt as a whole. Her projects helped to maintain Egypt's identity and continued the traditions that had been established by previous pharaohs. Her temples and monuments would stand as a reminder of her leadership for centuries to come. Sobenfer's most famous building project was the construction of a temple dedicated to the god Sobuk, whom she was closely associated with. Sobuk, the crocodile-headed god of strength and fertility, was a fitting symbol for a pharaoh who was determined to assert her power and maintain Egypt's prosperity. The temple would have served not only as a religious site but also as a visible marker of Sobenfer's rule. The use of temples as symbols of pharaonic power was common, But Sobonfu's use of this symbolism was particularly significant because it was an attempt to solidify her connection to the divine, especially at a time when her gender was still being questioned by some. There's an undeniable sense of subtlety in Sobonfu's approach to power. Whereas other pharaohs might have taken a more aggressive or militaristic approach, Sobonfu's reign was defined by diplomacy, cultural patronage, and the consolidation of Egypt's resources. This approach was not without its challenges, of course. Egypt was still a powerful empire, but it was beginning to face external threats and internal struggles. Sobonfu had to navigate these challenges while maintaining the appearance of strength and stability, and she did so by fostering alliances, commissioning building projects, and protecting Egypt's economic interests. As a woman, Sobonfu had to prove herself not just as a ruler but as a pharaoh capable of holding her own in a world dominated by male leaders. She knew that her reign would be scrutinized by historians and the public alike. Yet she didn't allow her gender to limit her scope of power. Sobonfu may have been the first woman to rule Egypt in the capacity of a pharaoh, but she wasn't the last. Her reign, however brief, served as a template for future female rulers, both in Egypt and in other parts of the world. But Sobonfu's reign wasn't just about creating monuments or securing Egypt's future through cultural projects. She also had to manage Egypt's relationship with its neighbors. Although Sobonfu was not known for military conquest, she understood the importance of diplomacy and alliances in a world where conflict was always just around the corner. While the details of Sobonfu's foreign policy are unclear, it is believed that she worked to strengthen Egypt's alliances with other kingdoms in the region. This diplomatic approach allowed her to focus on Egypt's internal stability while still protecting the kingdom from external threats. Sobonfu's reign, therefore, was defined not by the battles she fought but by the alliances she forged. Historians still debate whether Sobonfu's reign was entirely peaceful or if there were military conflicts during her time as pharaoh. It's likely that Sobonfu did have to deal with military issues, even if she wasn't directly involved in battle. Some suggest that Sobonfu's role as pharaoh was more ceremonial than anything else, with military decisions being made by her male advisors. Others argue that Sobonfu was more involved in military matters than we realize, although she may have kept her military strategy quiet to maintain her authority. The true extent of Sobonfu's military involvement remains a topic of debate, but what is clear is that her reign was one of relative peace and stability, at least in comparison to some of her more warlike predecessors. Sobonfu's reign also marked a significant shift in the way Egyptian rulers were depicted in art and culture. While male pharaohs were often shown as powerful warriors or godlike figures, Sobonfu was depicted more gracefully. Her images were not overtly militaristic but rather focused on her royal dignity and wisdom. This could be seen in the statues that depicted her not just as a ruler, but as a queen, seated gracefully on her throne. Her portrayal in art may have been a way of emphasizing her divine connection and her leadership qualities, rather than focusing on brute strength or military victories. In many ways, Sobonfu's reign was defined by a blend of tradition and innovation. She embraced the customs of Egypt, continuing the traditions of the pharaohs before her, but she also found her own way of ruling, one that emphasized stability, diplomacy, and cultural patronage. It's fascinating to think that Sobonfu, despite the limitations placed on her as a woman, was able to create such a lasting legacy through her careful management of Egypt's resources, her dedication to cultural preservation, and her ability to maintain Egypt's stability during a period of uncertainty. Her reign may have been short, but it was also impactful. Sobonfu's influence extended far beyond her time as pharaoh. Her leadership, subtle yet effective, would serve as a model for future generations of rulers. Today, we look back at Sobonfu's reign not just as a historical footnote, but as a powerful example of quiet strength and steady leadership. As we continue to explore Sobonfu's reign, we can see that one of the most striking aspects of her leadership was her ability to carefully craft a balance between tradition and innovation. While she faced immense pressure to conform to the expectations of her time, she was also unafraid to carve out her own unique path as the first female pharaoh of Egypt. Sobonfu's reign wasn't just about consolidating power, it was also about securing her place in a society that, until her time, had been strictly patriarchal. The way in which she navigated her leadership challenges, the balance she maintained between conformity and creativity, offers valuable insight into the intricacies of her rule. One of Sobonfu's primary methods of navigating this delicate balance was by drawing on Egypt's long-established traditions, particularly in the realm of religion and culture. Religion, as we've touched on before, played a central role in the life of every pharaoh, but for Sobonfu, it took on a different significance. Sobek, the crocodile god, was not just a deity in her reign's religious practices, but also a symbol of her authority. Being associated with Sobek meant more than just invoking the god's protection. It helped her reinforce her role as a strong, unshakable ruler. While Egypt had a long history of worshipping gods who were considered the protectors of the pharaoh, Sobonfu's connection to Sobek was unique. Sobek was a deity of dual nature, one that symbolized both destruction and creation. It's possible that Sobonfu embraced this aspect of Sobek's character to symbolize her own power, the ability to create stability while simultaneously protecting Egypt from external and internal chaos. Sobonfu's divine connection with Sobek made her reign feel both grounded in tradition and spiritually fortified, even as she stepped into the role of Egypt's first female ruler. It's likely that her religious policies helped to ease any doubts people might have had about her legitimacy as pharaoh. Beyond the religious symbolism, Sobonfu also drew strength from the cultural power of Egypt's royal family. The image of the pharaoh was one deeply ingrained in Egyptian society. Royalty wasn't just about politics, it was about a divine right to rule that was seen as part of the country's natural order. Sobonfu, as a member of the royal family, wasn't an outsider. She was still a descendant of Egypt's most powerful bloodlines. This connection gave her the cultural capital she needed to hold on to power. While male rulers had typically used their royal bloodlines to legitimize their reigns, Sobonfu's royal heritage allowed her to do the same, even though her gender made her position more tenuous in the eyes of many. The connection between religion, culture, and royal legitimacy was central to Sobonfu's ability to rule. But Sobonfu's reign wasn't just about upholding the status quo. She also recognized the need for reform. Her ability to subtly adjust and innovate while remaining grounded in Egypt's traditional practices was perhaps the hallmark of her leadership. She took steps to maintain the political stability that had made the 12th dynasty one of Egypt's most prosperous periods, while also recognizing that Egypt's world was changing. One of the more fascinating aspects of Sobonfu's leadership was her focus on the economy. In the ancient world, the economy wasn't just about trade or taxation, it was about the Nile. The floods of the Nile were what kept Egypt's agriculture and economy running. Sobonfu would have had to ensure that the country's vast agricultural sector remained in good shape, even as Egypt faced increasing pressure from foreign invaders and internal struggles. Historians still debate the specifics of how Sobonfu managed Egypt's economy, but what is clear is that she focused on maintaining stability. She didn't seek to push for new territories or military conquests. Instead, she sought to secure the resources Egypt already had and ensure that the kingdom remained strong from within. Agricultural practices were a cornerstone of Egypt's economy, and Sobonfur was likely keenly aware of the delicate balance required to maintain it. The Nile's flooding was both a gift and a potential disaster, and Sobonfur would have had to carefully monitor the river's behavior to ensure that the country's crops were properly irrigated. Her leadership in maintaining this balance between the Nile's unpredictable nature and Egypt's need for prosperity speaks to her deft handling of one of the kingdom's most important resources. Sobonfur understood that Egypt's long-term success didn't come from military conquest or expansion but from the careful stewardship of its land and resources. One thing that sets Sobonfur apart from many of her predecessors is that she was not a conqueror. In a time when military might often define a ruler's strength, Sobonfur took a different approach. While her male counterparts engaged in wars of expansion and conquest, Sobonfur kept Egypt's borders stable. This may have been due in part to the political climate she inherited, a time when Egypt had already expanded as much as it could and was now more focused on maintaining its power at home. By not engaging in wars of conquest, Sobonfur showed remarkable restraint. She was not interested in adding to Egypt's territory. Rather, she wanted to keep the empire secure, protect its economic resources, and ensure that Egypt's wealth continued to flow. Though Sobonfur may not have had the opportunity to engage in large-scale military campaigns, that doesn't mean she didn't face external threats. Egypt was always vulnerable to invaders, especially from the east, where rival kingdoms were continually vying for power. Sobonfur's ability to maintain Egypt's security without military expansion is a testament to her diplomacy and her ability to forge alliances. It's believed that she worked closely with neighboring rulers to ensure that Egypt's borders were secure, even if that meant making concessions or fostering trade relations. Sobonfur's reign was, in many ways, about managing Egypt's resources and navigating a world that was growing increasingly complex. While other pharaohs might have sought military glory or expansion, Sobonfur knew that the key to Egypt's success was balance, finding harmony between the old ways of governance and the changing realities of her time. She made sure to preserve Egypt's wealth, protect its resources, and maintain its cultural legacy without resorting to unnecessary conflict or war. Despite her challenges, Sobonfur's leadership was marked by an enduring quiet strength. She was not the kind of ruler who sought out grand public displays of power or military glory. Instead, she understood that the true strength of a ruler lies in their ability to maintain stability in a rapidly changing world. Sobonfur's reign may have been short, but it left a lasting impact on the kingdom she ruled. Her legacy, shaped by diplomacy, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to Egypt's prosperity, remains one of the most fascinating chapters in ancient history. As we continue to reflect on the remarkable reign of Sobonfur, one of the most compelling aspects of her leadership was the way she navigated the challenges of ruling during a transitional period in Egypt's history. Her time as pharaoh marked the end of the 12th dynasty, a period of great prosperity and strength, and the beginning of an era of uncertainty. The Egyptian empire was beginning to face internal and external pressures, and Sobonfur was tasked with holding it together during a time of change. The fact that she was able to do so, without resorting to military conquest, speaks volumes about her political acumen and the skill with which she managed her kingdom. Sobonfur's reign represents a kind of political pragmatism, a careful navigation of Egypt's shifting internal landscape. While other rulers might have sought military glory or expansion, Sobonfur understood that the real task of leadership lay in consolidation and stability. The external threats Egypt faced were real: invading forces, political unrest, and economic instability, but Sobenfur's approach to leadership was characterized by a quiet focus on preservation. She focused on maintaining the wealth of the kingdom, ensuring the safety of Egypt's borders, and promoting cultural and religious stability. Her ability to manage Egypt's affairs during this transitional period allowed her to leave a lasting impact on the kingdom's future. While the details of Sobenfur's reign are sparse, it's clear that she was able to maintain a sense of continuity despite the challenges. Her rule wasn't defined by the grand military campaigns that were typical of many male pharaohs, but by her ability to keep Egypt on steady footing during a time of flux. She was able to avoid the dramatic upheavals that often accompany periods of transition, and in doing so, she helped preserve Egypt's power and cultural identity for the generations that followed. Sobenfur's focus on cultural continuity was one of the defining features of her reign. She understood the importance of preserving the traditions that had made Egypt great, but she also recognized the need to adapt those traditions to the changing political landscape. One of the ways she did this was through her patronage of the arts and her commissioning of public works. The monuments she commissioned weren't just for personal glorification. They were meant to reinforce the stability of Egypt's ruling class and to send a message to the people that their pharaoh was both a protector of tradition and a forward-thinking leader. It's fascinating to think about Sobenfur's approach to art and architecture. As a female ruler in a male-dominated society, she had to tread carefully. Her public image was important not only for asserting her authority but also for reinforcing her legitimacy. The fact that she was able to build monuments and commission works of art that depicted her as a powerful and respected leader speaks to her ability to carefully navigate the constraints placed on her gender. While male rulers before her may have used military victories to bolster their public image, Sobenfur used cultural patronage as her primary tool. She worked within the framework of Egypt's artistic traditions to present herself as a strong, capable leader, emphasizing her wisdom, grace, and divine connection. But Sobenfur's use of art and architecture wasn't just about maintaining her public image, it was also about preserving the cultural identity of Egypt. The ancient Egyptians believed that monuments had a lasting power to shape the world, and Sobenfur's constructions were meant to leave a permanent imprint on Egyptian society. Through her patronage of the arts, Sobenfur ensured that Egypt's cultural heritage would continue to thrive, even as the political landscape shifted. The temples, statues, and reliefs she commissioned were not just symbols of her power, they were symbols of Egypt's enduring strength and legacy. At the same time, Sobenfur had to deal with the practical challenges of ruling an empire. While many of her predecessors were known for their military exploits, Sobenfur's reign was more focused on internal stability. She may have had to deal with threats from foreign invaders, but her leadership style was more about protecting Egypt's existing borders than expanding them. The Nile, Egypt's lifeblood, was both a blessing and a potential curse. Sobenfur would have had to carefully manage the agricultural resources that relied on the river's seasonal flooding. She would have worked with local leaders to ensure that Egypt's crops were well maintained and that the kingdom's economy remained strong. Though Sobenfur may not have been directly involved in military conflicts, her ability to maintain Egypt's stability was in itself a form of leadership. She had to balance the needs of the military, the economy, and the people, all while managing her image as the first female ruler of Egypt. This task wasn't an easy one, especially considering the patriarchal nature of ancient Egyptian society. But Sobenfur was able to succeed, in part because she didn't attempt to push against the prevailing norms. She worked within the constraints of her gender, using her intelligence, political skills, and understanding of Egypt's needs to secure her place as pharaoh. Another significant aspect of Sobenfru's reign was her relationship with her royal family. While we don't know the full details of her family dynamics, we do know that she was a member of the 12th dynasty's royal bloodline. The legitimacy of her rule was partially tied to her connection to her family, and it's likely that she leaned on the support of male relatives or advisors during her reign. However, Sobenfru was not a passive figurehead. She actively shaped the political landscape of her time. Her reign is remembered not just for her connection to her family but for her ability to lead independently. Despite the relative obscurity of her reign, Sobenfru's legacy as Egypt's first female pharaoh remains significant. Her story is one of quiet resilience, of a ruler who, despite the challenges of her gender and the political instability of the time, was able to lead Egypt through a turbulent period and secure its future. While we may never know the full extent of her accomplishments, we can appreciate the lasting impact Sobenfru had on Egyptian history. She may not have been a conqueror in the traditional sense, but Sobenfru was a leader who ensured Egypt's survival and continued prosperity during one of its most challenging periods. In the grand scheme of Egyptian history, Sobenfru's reign may have been short-lived, but its impact reverberates through the centuries. Her ability to navigate the complex political, cultural, and social landscapes of ancient Egypt shows that leadership isn't just about military prowess. It's about the ability to maintain balance, adapt to changing circumstances, and preserve a kingdom's identity. Sobenfru's reign may have been a quiet one, but it was no less powerful than that of her male predecessors. The ancient Egyptian state was one that placed a great deal of emphasis on the divine right of rulers. The pharaohs were believed to be the earthly embodiment of the gods, and their rule was seen as divinely ordained. In this context, Sobenfru's rule was no different. Her legitimacy as pharaoh was derived not only from her royal bloodline but also from her perceived connection to the gods. As we have already explored, Sobenfru's association with the crocodile god Sobek was crucial to her image as a strong and capable ruler. This divine connection gave her the authority to govern Egypt and helped her gain the respect of the people. However, while her religious connection was a source of strength, it also presented a challenge. As a woman, Sobenfru's divine right to rule may have been questioned by some. In ancient Egypt, women were not typically seen as the natural heirs to the throne. The expectation was that a male heir would ascend to the throne and continue the work of their father. But Sobenfru's reign shows us that, when necessary, the traditional norms could be bent to accommodate change. Her connection to Sobek allowed her to step into the role of pharaoh despite the limitations of her gender, but it also meant that she had to constantly prove herself capable of fulfilling her divine role. One of the most intriguing aspects of Sobenfru's reign is how she chose to portray herself to her people. Unlike some of her male predecessors, who often depicted themselves as mighty conquerors or warriors, Sobenfru presented herself as a ruler of dignity and wisdom. Her image was not that of a battle-hardened king but rather that of a steady and capable leader. Her statues, carvings, and monuments often depicted her as a regal, almost serene figure, never too harsh, but always powerful. This image of Sobenfru as a ruler who wielded power with grace and intelligence, rather than brute force, was perhaps one of the most lasting aspects of her reign. Sobenfru's self-presentation may also have been a response to the changing political climate of Egypt. The 12th dynasty, under her father Amenemhat III, had been a period of prosperity and stability, but by the time Sobenfru ascended the throne, Egypt was beginning to experience political instability. The central authority of the pharaoh was being challenged, both by external enemies and internal factions. Sobenfer may have seen her reign as an opportunity to restore some semblance of order and continuity to Egypt. And by adopting a calm, composed, and thoughtful public persona, Sobenfer was able to reassure her people that, despite the uncertainty of the times, Egypt remained in capable hands. This approach to leadership was not just about maintaining stability, it was about adapting to the needs of the time. While military conquests and expansion had once been the hallmark of Egypt's power, Sobenfer's reign marked a shift in the focus of pharaonic rule. Instead of conquering new lands, Sobenfer's reign was defined by diplomacy, internal management, and cultural preservation. Sobenfer's efforts to strengthen Egypt's economy, promote the arts, and ensure religious stability were all designed to maintain Egypt's status as a powerful and respected kingdom, without resorting to military conflict. It's also worth considering the role of women in ancient Egyptian society. While Sobenfer may have ruled Egypt as pharaoh, she was still operating within the context of a deeply patriarchal society. In many ways, her ability to rule effectively was shaped by the expectations placed on her as a woman. Female rulers in ancient Egypt were rare, and those who did ascend to the throne often had to face skepticism about their ability to lead. Sobenfer, however, managed to transcend the limitations of her gender by carefully navigating the traditional roles of rulers and reinterpreting them in a way that worked for her. She wasn't simply a female ruler, she was a ruler in her own right, and she proved that gender was not the ultimate determinant of power. In a world where political legitimacy was often defined by male-dominated traditions, Sobenfer's rule represents an exception to the rule. She had to work twice as hard to prove her worthiness as pharaoh, but she did so without sacrificing the core values of Egyptian society. She took on the mantle of leadership with a quiet grace, relying on her intelligence, political savvy, and strategic thinking to ensure Egypt's continued success. In many ways, Sobenfer's reign was a moment of quiet innovation in a world that was resistant to change. Her ability to consolidate power, balance tradition with innovation, and maintain Egypt's stability in turbulent times makes Sobenfer one of the most fascinating and significant figures in ancient Egyptian history. Yet, despite her remarkable accomplishments, Sobenfer's reign was short. She ruled for only about 4 years, a brief but impactful period in Egypt's long history. After her death, Sobenfer was succeeded by a male ruler, and her legacy was slowly forgotten. The fact that Sobenfer was largely forgotten by history, only to be rediscovered in the modern era, speaks to the shifting tides of memory and recognition. However, today we remember her not only as the first female pharaoh of Egypt but also as a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and grace in a world that was not kind to women in power. Sobenfer's story may have been obscured by time, but her legacy is one of quiet power and leadership. She faced the impossible task of leading Egypt during a time of political instability, and she did so with remarkable poise. Her reign wasn't marked by grand military victories, but by careful management of the kingdom's resources, cultural identity, and religious practices. Sobenfer's reign is a reminder that leadership doesn't always have to be loud or forceful. Sometimes, the quietest voices are the most powerful of all. Sobenfer's reign, despite its brevity, has left a profound mark on Egyptian history. Her time as pharaoh represents a crucial turning point, not only for the 12th dynasty but for the role of women in leadership positions throughout history. Sobenfer wasn't just a ruler who happened to be a woman, she was a ruler who demonstrated how leadership could transcend gender, adapting the historical norms of Egypt to her unique circumstances. Her reign was defined by a subtle, yet unmistakable, shift in the way Egypt was governed. while male pharaohs were often seen as conquerors, asserting their dominance through military victories and grandiose monuments. Sobonfru found a different path. Her leadership was not about conquest, it was about preservation. She didn't try to expand Egypt's borders. Instead, she worked hard to maintain the empire's stability in the face of growing pressures. Sobonfru's reign was one of careful stewardship. While her male counterparts might have defined their success through military might, Sobonfru's success was measured by her ability to keep Egypt intact during a turbulent period. One of the most remarkable aspects of Sobonfru's rule was her emphasis on internal stability. She understood that the strength of a kingdom wasn't just determined by its military prowess or territorial expansions, but by the strength of its internal systems. Under her leadership, Egypt saw a focus on agricultural stability, economic sustainability, and cultural preservation. While she may not have been the warrior pharaoh that some others were, Sobonfru's reign was no less important. Her ability to maintain Egypt's stability during a time of crisis made her one of Egypt's most successful rulers in her own way. Sobonfru's use of public works and architecture to reinforce her power is another noteworthy aspect of her reign. The ancient Egyptians understood the significance of monumental architecture as a tool for political expression. Temples, statues, and reliefs weren't just built for religious purposes. They were tools for asserting the pharaoh's power and authority. Sobonfru, understanding the importance of this symbolism, commissioned several major works of art and architecture. Her connection to the crocodile god Sobuk was central to her image, and the temple she commissioned in Sobuk's honor would have been a key focal point of her reign. These projects not only served to solidify her divine right to rule but also ensured that her reign would be remembered for centuries to come. The religious and cultural elements of Sobonfru's reign were not just about grand displays of power, they were about solidifying the social and spiritual fabric of Egypt. Her role as a religious leader was central to her legitimacy, and she knew how to leverage this aspect of her leadership to reinforce her authority. Sobonfru's association with Sobuk was not just a symbolic connection, it was a strategic one. By aligning herself with a god known for both strength and fertility, Sobonfru was able to present herself as a powerful ruler who could both protect and sustain Egypt. This religious imagery helped to quell any doubts about her authority, reminding the people that she was not only a ruler by blood but by divine right. Sobonfru's reign was also a period of relative peace. While Egypt had experienced its share of military conflicts over the centuries, Sobonfru did not follow the usual path of her predecessors. Instead of engaging in wars of conquest, she focused on keeping Egypt's borders secure and ensuring that Egypt's internal economy and infrastructure remained intact. Her decision to avoid military conflict may have been influenced by the political realities of her time. Egypt, as an empire, had already expanded significantly during the 12th dynasty, and Sobonfru may have realized that military expansion was no longer a practical goal. In many ways, her reign marked the end of an era of military conquest and the beginning of an era focused on internal governance and stability. Though Sobonfru's reign was relatively short, it had a lasting impact on Egyptian society. The monuments and buildings she left behind became symbols of her authority, and the policies she enacted helped to preserve Egypt's cultural identity during a period of political upheaval. Even after her death, Sobonfru's legacy lived on. Her ability to maintain Egypt's stability, both economically and politically, made her one of the most successful pharaohs of her time. Sobonfru's reign showed that leadership wasn't just about military conquest, it was about knowing when to hold steady, when to preserve the old ways, and when to adapt to changing circumstances. Though Sobonfru was the first female pharaoh of Egypt, her reign should not be viewed solely through the lens of her gender. While her rise to power was undoubtedly groundbreaking, her true legacy lies in her ability to lead. Sobenfur wasn't simply a figurehead, she was a ruler in her own right. She demonstrated that leadership could be effective regardless of gender, and that the qualities of a great ruler, wisdom, intelligence, and diplomacy, are not bound by societal expectations. Sobenfur's reign stands as a powerful example of how even in the most rigidly hierarchical societies, leadership can take many forms. The historical obscurity of Sobenfur's reign, especially in comparison to more famous male rulers, is a reflection of the patriarchal structures that have dominated our understanding of ancient history. Yet Sobenfur's story is a crucial one, offering us a glimpse into a different kind of leadership. Her ability to rise to power, maintain Egypt's stability, and leave behind a lasting cultural legacy speaks to the power of quiet strength. Sobenfur wasn't a conqueror in the traditional sense, but she was a ruler whose influence reverberated long after her death. Her reign may have been short, but it was one that helped shape the future of Egypt. Today, Sobenfur's legacy as the first female pharaoh of Egypt serves as a powerful reminder that leadership transcends gender. It reminds us that history is filled with figures whose stories were lost or forgotten, but whose contributions are no less important for being overlooked. Sobenfur's reign may not have been as dramatic or militaristic as some of her male counterparts, but it was no less essential to the continued greatness of Egypt. Sobenfur's reign, though relatively brief, had lasting effects that rippled through the fabric of Egyptian society. One of the most intriguing aspects of her rule is how her leadership style shaped the perception of female rulers in Egypt and beyond. While it's true that Sobenfur was one of the few women to rise to the throne in ancient Egypt, she was not the last to do so. Her reign paved the way for future female pharaohs, most notably Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most famous rulers. However, Sobenfur's contribution goes beyond simply being a trailblazer for women in leadership. It was about how she demonstrated that strong leadership could come from anyone, regardless of gender. What Sobenfur's reign makes clear is that the traditional gender norms of ancient Egypt were not as rigid as often assumed. Though she was an anomaly in a male-dominated society, Sobenfur was able to rise to power through a combination of political savvy, religious legitimacy, and cultural leadership. Her rule showed that even in one of the most patriarchal societies in history, a woman could hold the highest office and lead her people effectively. But Sobenfur's legacy is not just that she was a female pharaoh, it's that she proved leadership is about competence and vision, not gender. Her reign also highlights the delicate balance that rulers often have to maintain in times of transition. Sobenfur ruled during a period when Egypt was beginning to shift from the powerful 12th dynasty to a more unstable political era. The changing political landscape of the ancient world wasn't easy to navigate, and Sobenfur's reign marked a transition from a time of conquest to a time of preservation. Egypt had expanded greatly during the earlier dynasties, but Sobenfur recognized that the priority now was internal governance, maintaining stability, preserving Egypt's wealth, and preventing the empire from fragmenting. Unlike the typical model of pharaohs leading through military conquest and territorial expansion, Sobenfur focused on securing her kingdom through diplomacy, internal reforms, and careful economic management. This was especially crucial in her time, as Egypt's relationship with its neighbors was beginning to shift. The old alliances were no longer as reliable, and external threats from the Libyans, Nubians, and other peoples around Egypt's borders began to grow. Sobenfur had to be cautious. Her diplomatic strategies, trade agreements, and the maintenance of military alliances were key to keeping Egypt secure without resorting to unnecessary warfare. One of Sobonfu's most significant achievements was in managing Egypt's vast agricultural system, which was, of course, closely tied to the annual flooding of the Nile. Egypt's entire economy was built upon this system, and Sobonfu's ability to maintain the delicate balance of the Nile's flood cycles ensured that Egypt remained prosperous. Managing the annual flooding wasn't just about preparing for the harvest, it was about securing Egypt's long-term survival. Sobonfu's leadership during this time of instability ensured that Egypt's most vital resource, its agricultural system, remained intact and functional. But Sobonfu's reign also reveals the importance of art and culture in cementing a ruler's legacy. The grand monuments she commissioned, including temples and statues dedicated to Sobuk, were more than just representations of her power, they were symbols of Egypt's enduring cultural identity. While military victories might be commemorated in battle scenes, Sobonfu chose to represent her reign through architectural works that would outlast her time on the throne. Her focus on cultural legacy was part of her long-term vision for Egypt's future. By investing in art and architecture, she ensured that her reign would be remembered not just for the challenges it faced, but for the ways in which it helped to preserve Egypt's greatness. Sobonfu also used her status as a female ruler to redefine the concept of leadership in Egypt. While other female rulers like Hatshepsut are often celebrated for their monumental achievements, Sobonfu's legacy is often overlooked. This is largely due to the way history has traditionally been written, through a lens that has tended to ignore or minimize the roles of women in power. Sobonfu's reign, though not as grand or long-lasting as some of her male counterparts, remains a powerful example of how women, even in ancient times, were able to rise to the highest levels of authority. It's fascinating to consider that Sobonfu may have faced challenges from both her male peers and the Egyptian public. The male-dominated society of Egypt was not necessarily welcoming of a female ruler, especially one who did not follow the traditional military model of leadership. Yet Sobonfu managed to carve out a place for herself, not by mimicking the typical male pharaoh but by embodying the qualities of wisdom, resilience, and strategic thinking. In doing so, she created a new paradigm for how a ruler could approach leadership. Sobonfu's leadership style provides a refreshing contrast to the more aggressive military leadership that often dominates historical accounts of ancient Egypt. Rather than focusing on war and conquest, Sobonfu concentrated on the careful management of her kingdom. Her success was not defined by the size of her empire or the number of battles she won, but by her ability to keep Egypt intact during a time of political uncertainty. The importance of internal stability, economic preservation, and cultural continuity were key elements of her rule, and they remain relevant lessons for leadership today. In some ways, Sobonfu's reign is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful rulers are not the ones who fight the most battles, but the ones who understand how to maintain peace and stability. Sobonfu may not have been the most militarily famous pharaoh, but her reign was arguably one of the most successful in maintaining Egypt's status as a world power during a time of transition. The lessons we can learn from Sobonfu's leadership are timeless, offering valuable insights into the qualities that make a great leader. Sobonfu's impact on Egyptian history is perhaps best appreciated through the lens of her enduring legacy. While her reign was relatively short, it had far-reaching consequences for Egypt's future. Her ability to preserve Egypt's stability, protect its resources, and maintain its cultural identity was key to ensuring that Egypt would remain a dominant force for centuries to come. Sobonfu may not have been the most famous or the most militarily successful pharaoh, but her legacy as a ruler who focused on preservation and consolidation speaks volumes about the qualities that define great leadership. The relatively short reign of Sobonfur also raises intriguing questions about the nature of power and succession in ancient Egypt. After her death, Sobonfur's name was largely forgotten for centuries, and Egypt's history would continue without much acknowledgement of her groundbreaking role as the first female pharaoh. However, while her reign may not have received the same level of posthumous fame as that of other pharaohs like Ramses II or Tutankhamun, Sobonfur's legacy is slowly being rediscovered in modern times. In fact, her story is a reminder of how historical narratives can be shaped by the limitations of the past, how women in power, even when they succeed in monumental ways, can be written out of history. Sobonfur's reign raises the question of how women's leadership is remembered throughout history. Many of Egypt's more famous female rulers, like Cleopatra or Hatshepsut, have garnered attention due to their lasting impact. Yet Sobonfur's legacy remained on the margins until recent archaeological discoveries began to shed light on her achievements. Her name, often lost in the annals of time, is gradually being reclaimed, thanks to efforts to unearth and interpret Egyptian history more inclusively. Sobonfur's reign, once little more than a footnote in Egyptian history, is slowly being recognized as one of great significance in its own right. Interestingly, Sobonfur's legacy also prompts us to reconsider what makes a pharaoh's reign successful. While some pharaohs are remembered for their vast building projects, military conquests, or the grandeur of their tombs, Sobonfur's success was defined by her ability to preserve and stabilize Egypt during a time of internal and external turmoil. Her reign was not characterized by military victories or the expansion of Egypt's borders. Instead, it was marked by economic stability, cultural preservation, and religious legitimacy. Sobonfur's ability to rule effectively in a changing world shows that leadership does not always have to be grandiose or militaristic. It can also be about maintaining equilibrium and ensuring the continuity of the state. Sobonfur's legacy is also notable for the way in which her reign helped lay the groundwork for future female rulers. After Sobonfur, Egypt would see another female pharaoh in Hatshepsut, who would go on to become one of the most successful and well-known rulers in Egypt's history. While Sobonfur's reign may have been short, it proved that a woman could rule Egypt in her own right, and that women had the capacity for effective leadership despite the gendered constraints of the time. Hatshepsut would follow in Sobonfur's footsteps, taking on the title of pharaoh and ruling Egypt with authority and wisdom. The historical trajectory of female rulers in ancient Egypt did not end with Sobonfur and Hatshepsut either. Other women in Egypt's royal line continued to hold power, though often in more informal ways. For example, Cleopatra, who would rule Egypt almost 1,000 years after Sobonfur, is still one of the most famous female monarchs in history. While Cleopatra's reign was shaped by politics, diplomacy, and military strategy, much like Sobonfur's, it also demonstrated the ongoing challenge that women faced when attempting to assert political power in a male-dominated world. Sobonfur's reign paved the way for these women and showed that women could rise to power, if not always easily or without resistance. Sobonfur's story also reveals the difficulty of navigating the intersection of power, gender, and legacy. As the first female pharaoh, Sobonfur had to prove her authority in ways that were different from those of her male counterparts. She may have faced skepticism because of her gender, but her reign showed that leadership could be defined by wisdom, diplomacy, and the ability to preserve what had been achieved by her predecessors. By the end of her reign, Sobonfur had established herself as a capable and respected ruler, but because of the patriarchal nature of ancient Egyptian society, Her legacy remained overshadowed by the male pharaohs who came before and after her. This erasure is not unique to Egypt. It is a common theme throughout history, where the achievements of women in power have been overlooked or minimized in favor of the more well-documented contributions of men. Sobenfur's legacy, however, is slowly being reclaimed by modern historians and archaeologists, who are uncovering her contributions to Egypt's history and reminding us of her significant role as the first woman to rule the kingdom. The fact that Sobenfur was initially lost to history speaks to the power of historical narratives to shape the way we understand the past. While history has often been written by those in power, the ongoing work of historians and archaeologists is allowing us to recover these lost voices and to ensure that figures like Sobenfur are recognized for the leadership they provided. Even more remarkable than Sobenfur's contributions to Egypt's political stability and economic growth is her ability to shape Egypt's cultural and religious identity. By commissioning public works, including temples, statues, and monuments, Sobenfur reinforced her position as pharaoh and emphasized her divine right to rule. This artistic patronage served not only to secure her place in history but also to ensure that Egypt's religious and cultural traditions remained intact. Her reign, though brief, demonstrated that the power of a ruler is not always measured by military victories but by the ability to uphold the integrity of a civilization's values, beliefs, and way of life. Sobenfur's legacy may not have been celebrated as grandly as that of other pharaohs, but her role as the first female ruler of Egypt is undeniably significant. Her reign challenges our understanding of what it means to lead and demonstrates that leadership can take many forms. Her accomplishments, though often overlooked, offer a powerful reminder that women have always had the capacity for great leadership, even in the most challenging circumstances. Sobenfur's reign is a testament to the resilience and strength of women throughout history, and her legacy is slowly being rediscovered by those who are committed to telling a more complete and inclusive version of the past. Sobenfur's reign also serves as an important reflection on the nature of leadership itself. We often think of powerful rulers in terms of grand conquests, military victories, and legendary monuments. However, Sobenfur's leadership challenges these traditional definitions. She didn't expand Egypt's borders or engage in large-scale battles. Instead, she focused on securing what had already been achieved by her predecessors, ensuring Egypt's stability during a time of uncertainty. Her leadership was quieter but equally vital, reminding us that there are many different ways to wield power and that sometimes the most effective leadership comes from maintaining what already exists rather than seeking to conquer or expand. Sobenfur's reign was also defined by her approach to governance. Unlike other pharaohs who were often seen as militaristic conquerors, Sobenfur adopted a more diplomatic approach. The need for military conquest had diminished by her time, and Sobenfur's focus was on internal stability, cultural continuity, and economic resilience. This shift in focus from military expansion to consolidation marked a significant moment in Egypt's history. It's easy to see why Sobenfur's reign might be overshadowed by those who came before and after her, as the tradition of conquest had long been a defining characteristic of pharaohs. But Sobenfur's ability to keep Egypt strong without resorting to war is a profound reminder that power isn't always about aggression. Sometimes, it's about the quiet management of resources, alliances, and diplomacy. She also understood that her position as pharaoh was not just a political role, but a divine one. Like all pharaohs, Sobenfur was seen as the intermediary between the gods and the people, and her ability to secure divine favor was crucial to her legitimacy. Her association with Sobek, the crocodile god, was central to her divine right to rule. Sobek was a god of strength and protection, and by associating herself with him, Sobenfru reinforced her image as a ruler who could both protect and sustain Egypt. This religious aspect of her reign was not just symbolic, it was a key part of her ability to command respect and authority. In a time when divine legitimacy was paramount to the role of a pharaoh, Sobenfru's religious affiliation helped to secure her place as Egypt's ruler, despite her gender. At the same time, Sobenfru's reign demonstrates the limits of religious legitimacy. While her divine connection helped her claim the throne, it didn't automatically ensure the success of her reign. Sobenfru had to prove her ability as a ruler through her actions, and this is where her strategic thinking and diplomatic prowess came into play. She didn't simply rely on her association with Sobek to rule, she actively engaged in the administration of Egypt, working with advisors and local leaders to manage the kingdom's resources and protect its borders. Sobenfru was not just a passive figurehead, she was an active and engaged ruler, deeply involved in the day-to-day affairs of Egypt. Sobenfru's leadership also demonstrates the intersection of power and gender in the ancient world. While Egypt was undoubtedly a patriarchal society, Sobenfru was able to navigate the constraints of her gender to become one of Egypt's most capable rulers. Though she faced skepticism due to her gender, she proved that leadership was about more than just conforming to traditional roles. It was about having the vision, intelligence, and determination to rule effectively. Sobenfru's ability to claim the throne, maintain Egypt's stability, and leave a lasting cultural legacy shows that leadership is not confined by gender, and that women have always had the capacity for great leadership, even in the most restrictive societies. Her reign also provides a fascinating example of the ways in which female rulers throughout history have often had to prove themselves in unique ways. While male rulers were often expected to prove their worth through military success and the expansion of their empires, female rulers like Sobenfru had to prove their authority through diplomatic skill, cultural patronage, and internal governance. Sobenfru's story is a powerful reminder that women in power have often faced additional challenges simply because of their gender, and yet, despite these challenges, they have managed to lead with wisdom, grace, and strength. Sobenfru's legacy is all the more remarkable given the brevity of her reign. Her time as pharaoh lasted only a few short years, and yet, she was able to accomplish much. She managed to preserve Egypt's stability, reinforce its cultural identity, and secure its economic resources during a time of political uncertainty. Her reign was defined by a focus on diplomacy, cultural preservation, and economic resilience, rather than conquest or military victories. Sobenfru's reign is a powerful example of how a ruler's success can be measured not by the size of their empire, but by their ability to maintain stability and continuity. Despite her accomplishments, Sobenfru's reign was largely overshadowed by the male rulers who came before and after her. After her death, Egypt's historical record focused primarily on the male pharaohs who would continue the work of the 12th dynasty. Sobenfru's name was gradually forgotten, and her reign was treated as a brief and unremarkable interlude. This erasure of female rulers in history is a pattern that we see across many cultures and time periods. However, in recent years, Sobenfru's story has begun to emerge from the shadows, as historians and archaeologists work to recover and retell the stories of women in power. The rediscovery of Sobenfru's legacy is part of a larger movement to re-evaluate the history of women in leadership. While her reign may have been short, Sobenfru's influence on Egypt and on the role of women in leadership positions is undeniable. She was the first female pharaoh of Egypt, and though she faced numerous challenges, she proved that women could rule effectively in a male-dominated world. Her legacy is a testament to the strength, resilience, and wisdom of women throughout history, and her story continues to inspire and educate those who seek to understand the complexities of leadership in the ancient world. As we reflect on Sobenfr's life and reign, we are reminded that history is often written by the victors, and that many important stories have been lost or overlooked along the way. Sobenfr's reign may have been one of quiet strength, but her contributions to Egypt's stability, culture, and legacy are anything but quiet. Her story, once forgotten, is now being rediscovered as part of the broader narrative of women in power. In doing so, we gain a fuller understanding of not only Sobenfr's impact on Egypt but also of the untold stories of women who have shaped history throughout the ages. Sobenfr's story is more than just a tale of political leadership. It's also a reflection of the enduring power of legacy and how history often remembers those who led with subtlety rather than spectacle. While her reign was relatively short, the impact of her leadership went beyond the immediate years of her rule. What Sobenfr demonstrated during her time as pharaoh was the true nature of enduring power, the ability to influence, preserve, and protect. She was not defined by war or conquest but by the long-term stability she brought to Egypt, making her legacy one of profound, quiet strength. One of the things that sets Sobenfr apart from many other pharaohs is that her legacy did not rely on the traditional markers of power. While the great military conquests and extravagant building projects of other rulers often became the defining features of their reigns, Sobenfr's strength came from her ability to manage her kingdom effectively and wisely. The preservation of Egypt's cultural traditions, its agricultural base, and its internal stability during a time of political uncertainty were the hallmarks of her reign. She understood that true leadership often means keeping a kingdom on course through turbulent waters rather than seeking to conquer new lands or win new battles. Sobenfr's reign was marked by a deft understanding of what it meant to lead in a time of transition. Egypt was changing, and while Sobenfr did not have the military strength or territorial expansion of previous rulers, she excelled at maintaining Egypt's core. Her ability to adapt to the shifting landscape and preserve what Egypt already had set her apart from other rulers. Sobenfr's reign speaks to the power of maintaining continuity, not just for the sake of stability but for ensuring that the culture, traditions, and economic base of the kingdom endure for future generations. There's an undeniable sense of grace in Sobenfr's leadership. She did not have to prove herself in battle or through vast territorial gains. Her greatness was evident in how she navigated the challenges of her time. The focus of her rule was not on grand spectacle, but on ensuring Egypt's survival and maintaining its long-standing glory. Her ability to wield power without the usual reliance on force or military prowess is a testament to her strength and intelligence as a ruler. She made sure that Egypt was strong enough to weather internal instability and external threats, but she did not feel the need to assert her power through aggression. Sobenfr's reign was one of measured diplomacy and management, qualities that are often overlooked in history but are no less important than military victories. Sobenfr's story also invites us to think about the role of women in leadership throughout history. Her reign challenges the traditional narrative that places male rulers at the center of historical progress. While history has often been written by those who held the reins of power, almost always male, it is important to remember that many women, like Sobenfr, led in their own ways. Sobenfr's story, though once relegated to the margins of history, offers a crucial insight into the types of leadership that were often overlooked or forgotten. Women who held power, whether as queens, empresses, or pharaohs, had to demonstrate an even greater degree of skill and adaptability to secure their place in a world that wasn't designed for them to rule. Sobenfr was a woman who understood the weight of her position, not just in terms of power, but in terms of the legacy she would leave. Her reign wasn't about personal glory, it was about preserving the legacy of Egypt. It was about ensuring that Egypt remained a powerful kingdom, one that could withstand external invasions, internal political shifts, and economic struggles. Sobonfuru's focus on preserving Egypt's cultural and religious identity, coupled with her careful management of the kingdom's resources, was a strategy that ensured Egypt's future stability. One of the most remarkable things about Sobonfuru is how she operated within a system that was built to favor men. She was a female ruler in a society that, traditionally, did not see women as fit for the throne. Yet, Sobonfur didn't try to conform to the traditional mold of a pharaoh. Instead, she shaped her rule around the idea that leadership could come from anywhere, regardless of gender. Her ability to do this while maintaining the traditional symbols of power is a testament to her political acumen. She wore the regalia of pharaohs before her, commanded armies, and patronized the arts, all while adapting these tools of leadership to her own style. Sobonfur's reign was a perfect example of how a ruler's ability to lead is not defined by their gender but by their competence and vision. There's also a certain tragedy in Sobonfur's legacy being forgotten for so long. History, especially ancient history, has a tendency to obscure the achievements of women, particularly those who weren't the most flamboyant or militarily successful. Sobonfur's legacy was relegated to the shadows, overshadowed by the more widely known male rulers of Egypt. Yet, despite this, Sobonfur's story is being reclaimed. Modern scholars and historians are beginning to recognize the importance of her reign, not just for the fact that she was the first female pharaoh, but for the lasting impact she had on the stability and continuity of Egypt. Today, Sobonfur's legacy is being rediscovered and appreciated for what it was, a reign marked by wisdom, diplomacy, and quiet power. Her leadership may not have been defined by military triumphs, but it was no less impactful. Sobonfur was a ruler who understood the importance of preserving Egypt's internal stability, maintaining the strength of its economy, and ensuring the continuity of its cultural and religious identity. These contributions, though often overlooked, were vital to the survival of Egypt as a powerful civilization. Sobonfur's reign teaches us that leadership is not only about military success and territorial conquest but about maintaining what is already great and ensuring its survival for the future. As we conclude Sobonfur's journey, we are reminded that great leadership comes in many forms. Some leaders conquer, others preserve. Sobonfur was a ruler who understood the importance of balance, who knew that leadership could be achieved through quiet strength, strategic thinking, and cultural continuity. Her legacy, though once forgotten, is being recognized today as a powerful example of what it means to lead with grace, intelligence, and a steady hand. Sobonfur may not have sought glory through war or conquest, but her legacy remains as enduring as any pharaoh's. By now, we've seen how Sobonfur's reign exemplifies leadership that doesn't rely on the traditional markers of military victories or territorial expansion. Her legacy isn't defined by what she conquered, but by what she preserved and protected. In a world where history often elevates those who engage in large-scale battles or grand displays of power, Sobonfur's reign offers a counter-narrative, a reminder that great leadership can sometimes be the quiet, steady force that holds everything together during times of upheaval. And yet, even with this quiet form of leadership, her impact on Egypt was profound. One of the key aspects of Sobonfur's rule was her ability to engage in diplomacy and build lasting relationships. While she wasn't leading massive military campaigns, Sobonfur understood the importance of Egypt's relationships with its neighbors. In the ancient world, Diplomacy was just as essential as military strength, and Sobenfer's reign was a testament to this principle. It's likely that she used her political acumen to navigate the shifting landscape of Egypt's foreign relations, forging alliances and managing trade to ensure Egypt remained a dominant force in the region. The preservation of Egypt's borders and internal resources was paramount to Sobenfer's approach to governance. As Egypt faced increasing pressure from external forces, Sobenfer focused on securing her kingdom through diplomacy and strategic alliances. The political climate of the time required delicate balancing. Sobenfer had to tread carefully between maintaining Egypt's strength and avoiding overreach. Unlike many of her male predecessors who sought to expand Egypt's empire through military conquest, Sobenfer demonstrated that a ruler's strength didn't necessarily lie in expansion, but in consolidation and preservation. Sobenfer's ability to stabilize Egypt during a time of transition speaks to her skill as a ruler. Egypt, like many ancient civilizations, was constantly dealing with internal divisions, external threats, and shifting political dynamics. Sobenfer's reign, though short, was a period of relative calm amidst these pressures. Her diplomatic approach ensured that Egypt's economy remained stable, and her focus on maintaining Egypt's agricultural strength, particularly in managing the vital resources of the Nile, reinforced the kingdom's resilience. Sobenfer's reign wasn't marked by military triumphs or territorial conquests, but by her ability to preserve Egypt's key economic and cultural pillars during a period of change. Sobenfer's approach to leadership also included a deep understanding of the power of symbols. As a female pharaoh, she had to assert her legitimacy in a male-dominated society, and one of the ways she did this was by embracing the full range of royal symbols associated with male rulers. She wore the traditional regalia of the pharaoh, including the royal crown and even the symbolic beard of a male ruler, which reinforced her divine right to rule. This use of royal symbolism helped Sobenfer bridge the gender gap and assert herself as an equal to the male pharaohs who came before her. By adopting these symbols, Sobenfer was able to show that she was just as capable as any male ruler, despite the challenges posed by her gender. This blending of tradition and innovation, honoring Egypt's past while adapting to its present, was a hallmark of Sobenfer's leadership. While other pharaohs were often concerned with military glory and territorial expansion, Sobenfer's primary focus was on Egypt's internal health and stability. She used the symbols of the pharaoh to solidify her rule, but she didn't rely on the same strategies as her male counterparts. Her leadership was marked by a commitment to continuity and preservation rather than a desire for glory through conquest. Sobenfer's leadership was also closely tied to her relationship with Egypt's religious traditions. The pharaoh was not only the political leader but also the spiritual leader of the country. Sobenfer understood the importance of maintaining the people's faith in the divine right of the pharaoh, and she reinforced her own legitimacy by aligning herself with the crocodile god Sobek. This connection to Sobek, a powerful god associated with fertility, strength, and protection, allowed Sobenfer to solidify her role as the divine ruler of Egypt. While her male predecessors may have been associated with gods of war or conquest, Sobenfer's connection to Sobek presented her as a protector of the land and its people, rather than a warrior queen. In a world where divine legitimacy was central to political power, Sobenfer's religious affiliation gave her the credibility she needed to rule effectively. Though her reign was short, Sobenfer's ability to maintain Egypt's stability during a period of political uncertainty makes her one of the most successful pharaohs of her time. In fact, her focus on internal stability rather than military conquest allowed Egypt to weather many of the challenges it faced during her reign. Sobenfer's reign was a period of quiet strength, not of military victories or grand conquests, but of preserving the core of Egypt's power, its culture, economy, and religious traditions. And in a world where pharaohs were often defined by their military successes, Sobonfer's ability to hold Egypt together through diplomacy, careful management, and cultural continuity marks her as a ruler of extraordinary wisdom and foresight. Sobonfer's legacy is also a reminder of the power of inclusion and the importance of recognizing the contributions of women in leadership. Her reign is an example of how women, even in the most patriarchal societies, have found ways to lead and contribute in significant ways. While her reign may have been overshadowed by the male rulers who came before and after her, Sobonfer's story is slowly being rediscovered and appreciated for the quiet brilliance it represents. She was a ruler who made lasting contributions to Egypt's stability, and in doing so, she paved the way for future female rulers, proving that leadership is not limited by gender, but by the ability to understand the needs of the people and the wisdom to navigate the complexities of governance. Sobonfer's legacy continues to inspire those who seek to understand leadership in its many forms. Her story challenges us to think about power differently, not as something that is won through conquest, but as something that can be maintained through careful governance, cultural preservation, and diplomatic skill. Her reign may not have been as flashy as those of other pharaohs, but it was no less important. Sobonfer's leadership stands as a testament to the strength that comes from wisdom, the quiet power of strategic thinking, and the ability to balance tradition with innovation. The lasting legacy of Sobonfer lies not only in the way she governed Egypt but also in how her reign exemplified the complexities of leadership. While she may have been the first woman to ascend to the throne as a pharaoh, it's her unique approach to power, blending diplomacy, culture, and tradition, that made her reign so significant. As we look back on her life and rule, it becomes clear that Sobonfer's leadership was not defined by military exploits or grand conquests but by her ability to hold the kingdom together through a time of transition. One of the enduring themes of Sobonfer's reign is her ability to navigate political instability and external pressure. While her male counterparts often relied on military force to expand Egypt's borders or protect its territory, Sobonfer chose to take a more measured, strategic approach. She focused on maintaining Egypt's core, the strength of its economy, its religious traditions, and its cultural identity. The transition between dynasties and the shifting political realities meant that Sobonfer's reign was one of consolidation rather than expansion. Her leadership showed that maintaining internal peace and stability could be just as vital, if not more so, than waging war. In the grand scheme of Egyptian history, Sobonfer's reign may seem brief, but its impact cannot be underestimated. She played a crucial role in ensuring Egypt's continuity as a dominant power in the ancient world. By avoiding military conflict and focusing on strengthening Egypt from within, she preserved the kingdom's wealth, its agricultural system, and its cultural heritage. Sobonfer's reign is a perfect example of how effective leadership can come not from expansion, but from consolidation and preservation. Sobonfer's reign also marked a cultural turning point. She commissioned monumental works of art and architecture, such as the temple dedicated to Sobuk, which became an enduring symbol of her power and her connection to the divine. These monuments weren't just for personal glorification, they were part of a larger effort to ensure Egypt's cultural continuity and to reassure the people that the kingdom was in capable hands. Sobonfer's use of art as a tool for political and spiritual legitimacy highlights her awareness of the power of symbolism and her ability to leverage Egypt's religious and cultural traditions to solidify her rule. But what makes Sobonfer's reign particularly interesting is how she balanced the expectations of her society with her role as a female ruler. She had to navigate a deeply patriarchal society, where the idea of a woman on the throne was radical. In a world that often viewed women as figures of domestic influence rather than political power, Sobonfu's reign represented a shift in the way people thought about leadership. She did not challenge the patriarchal order overtly. Instead, she worked within it, using the symbols and tools of pharaonic power to assert her legitimacy. By doing so, she demonstrated that the qualities that make a good leader, wisdom, strength, resilience, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances, are not inherently male or female. Historians still debate how much Sobonfu's gender influenced her reign. Some argue that she may have had to work harder than her male counterparts to prove her legitimacy. Others suggest that her gender played little role in how she was viewed, as the Egyptians revered their pharaohs for their wisdom and ability to maintain Egypt's stability rather than for their gender. Nevertheless, Sobonfu's reign is a clear example of a woman in power overcoming the traditional gender limitations of her time and demonstrating that female rulers could wield the same authority as their male counterparts. Sobonfu's story also highlights the way women in power have been historically forgotten or minimized. Although she was the first female pharaoh, her reign was not celebrated to the same extent as those of her male counterparts. It wasn't until modern times that historians and archaeologists began to rediscover Sobonfu's contributions to Egypt's history. This historical erasure is a reflection of the gendered biases that have often shaped the way history is written. Sobonfu's legacy, however, is being reclaimed, and her story is being recognized as one of great importance in Egypt's long history. Her reign is a powerful reminder of how history has often overlooked the accomplishments of women in leadership positions, particularly in ancient times. Women like Sobonfu, Hatshepsut, and Cleopatra made significant contributions to their societies, yet their stories were often obscured by the patriarchal structures of their time. The rediscovery of Sobonfu's legacy allows us to reassess our understanding of the past and to recognize the crucial roles women have played throughout history. Sobonfu's contributions to Egypt's stability and cultural identity are finally being appreciated for their lasting impact on the kingdom's future. At the heart of Sobonfu's legacy is the quiet strength with which she ruled. While her reign was not marked by military conquest or territorial expansion, Sobonfu's ability to maintain Egypt's internal stability during a time of political upheaval was a significant achievement. Her leadership was not flashy or dramatic, but it was effective and enduring. She understood that power doesn't always have to be wielded forcefully. Sometimes, the greatest power lies in the ability to preserve what is already great. Sobonfu's reign reminds us that leadership is not always about taking bold, outward action. It is also about knowing when to hold steady, when to protect, and when to adapt to changing circumstances. As we reflect on Sobonfu's reign and the impact she had on Egypt's history, we see that her legacy is one of resilience, wisdom, and quiet determination. She proved that leadership can come from unexpected places and that women can rule with the same authority and effectiveness as men. Sobonfu's reign may have been brief, but her legacy continues to resonate today, reminding us of the enduring power of thoughtful, steady leadership and the importance of recognizing the contributions of women throughout history.